notion arises in the street about something. Let us say a lamppost, which many influential persons desire to pull down. A grey-clad monk, who is the spirit of the Middle Ages, is approached upon the matter, and begins to say, in the arid manner of the schoolmen, "Let us first of all consider, my brethren, the value of light, if light be in itself good." At this point, he is somewhat excusably knocked down. All the people make a rush for the lamppost. The lamppost is down in 10 minutes, and they go about congratulating each other on their unbelievable practicality. But as things go on, they do not work out so easily. Some people have pulled the lamppost down because they wanted the electric light. Some because they wanted old iron. Some because they wanted darkness, because their deeds were evil. Some thought it not enough, the lamppost. Some too much. Some acted because they wanted to smash municipal machinery. Some because they wanted to smash something. And there is war in the night, no man knowing whom he strikes. So gradually and inevitably, today, tomorrow, or the next day, there comes back the conviction that the monk was right after all, and it all depends on what is the philosophy of light. Only what we might have discussed under the gas lamp, we now must discuss in the dark. I think that quote's relevant to this lecture. Why? I'm not sure. So, I'll leave you guys to figure that out. Oh, nope. Metaethics is a frequently used term in debate, and a frequently misunderstood term in debate, both by the people running it, and by the opponents hitting it, and by the judges voting on it or voting against it. This is an unfortunate coincidence because we all make metaethical claims and stipulations all the time in our everyday life. All the time when we reason about morality, we make statements that are more than just statements about morality. So to begin, I want to divide the moral landscape, as philosophers understand it, into 3 parts. I had a whiteboard marker which has now disappeared, but that's okay. I will just... Actually, I had no solution. Oh well.
Oh, there's one on the other side.
Ah! I have not lost it. Well, I lost it and you found it. Normative ethics forms the center. This is what in debate we might normally regard as one's value criterion. The thing that tells us how we ought to act. It's a stipulation about what is good and what is bad. And beyond that, it also stipulates what is right and what is wrong. Goodness and badness says what has value. Rightness and wrongness says how we treat that value. So for instance, I can say pleasure is good, and that we should maximize pleasure. That stipulates a condition of rightness, maximize value, and a condition of goodness, pleasure has value. Instead I could say life has value, but rather than maximizing life, which would be kind of weird, and be like we should have as many children as possible, which is like a weird ethical theory, instead we say we should respect life, and simply not violate, not kill people. This would seem to fit with our intuitions. Not all types of good we think should be regarded in the same way. I've given this example in several other lectures, but it'll, behoove you, I don't know what that word means, but it sounds like it applied, to hear it again. And it goes something like this. In certain districts, municipalities, and cities, there's a law. Every time you cut down a tree to build a building, you have to plant a new tree somewhere else. This is to say that we regard trees as good, and there's a particular way to treat those goods, which is right, namely to preserve their quantity. But we don't seem to regard that this is true for all good things. For instance, we normally also regard children as good. But if I were to run over someone's child, it would likely not satisfy their parents and say, "Don't worry, I'll produce you a new one and replace it." In fact, I can't even be like, "No, I'll produce 2, right? I bet I can get twins, right, for you, through an adoption agency or something, right? So it'll all be good, right? You'll get 2 for the price of 1. Parents aren't going to be satisfied. Because the sort of rightness I'm appealing to there is not proper to the sort of goodness, right, that seems to be implicit within the goodness of a child, or one's child. Or the goodness of humanity is not the sort of thing that's comparable between instances. Anytime we make reasoning like that, anytime we analyze what is this sort of good, right, and so what would be the proper notion of rightness to that, I'm making a meta-ethical claim. A claim not about what is right or wrong in this context, but instead about how I understand the concepts of right and wrong. What is the basis for these sort of moral evaluations? So this lets us move in one direction from normative ethics. Foundational questions that tell us what does it mean to make a statement that's right or wrong? What is moral language? Where does it come from? Why do we do it? How does our other scientific theories apply? How do theories of criminal justice apply? What does it mean to be responsible? All of these things do not tell me exactly how to act, but they're all things I wonder about when I try to figure out how to act. This is what we call meta-ethics. And that'll be the focus of this lecture. It's worth to note in passing that we can also move in the opposite direction from normative ethics. This is known as applied ethics. I don't know how you spell applied. In fact, it might even positivism ethics, right? But that's okay. Applied ethics takes the normative ethical theory and tries to situate it within the particulars of a component implementation program of some sort. These are things like business ethics, medical ethics, legal ethics, international relations, and the ethical implications of that. It says, okay, so you want to treat people's ends themselves. What does that mean in end-of-life cases when they're close to death or in a lot of pain? Okay, we want to treat people's ends themselves. What does that mean for those who don't seem responsible for their actions, and how do you treat them legally? It takes moral principles, right, both meta-ethical and normative ethical, and applies them to situations. This is what normally happens in your contention, right? You apply the ethical theory to particular questions of right action, right? Not in the abstract, is killing ever right, but instead the particular. Would this constitute a wrongful killing? However, that's not the point of this lecture. That's the point of living life, and so we're not going to talk about it anymore. We'll still talk about normative ethics a little bit, because it's impossible to talk about one without the other. So, sorry, my computer's still not bringing up my notes, but that's okay. Yes, maybe. Nope. Okay, whatever. That'll go away. Anyway, so, what was I? Oh wait, now I established what sort of meta-ethics looks like. So, this means that we can analyze the sort of statement we make within debate rounds as being either meta-ethical or normative ethical. Okay? So, when someone says, morality is grounded in practical reason, a refrain heard quite often from certain schools, namely ones that I used to debate at, mainly, or some other ones who wanted to debate like me, you will hear that statement, and that is making a meta-ethical claim. It's not saying what's right or wrong, because practical reason alone, right, just practical reason itself is not a system of right and wrong. But it tells us where moral discourse comes from. For those of you who want to know more about this, you should go to Introduction to Kantian Ethics yesterday. We'll talk a little bit about it more today. So, the way we situate the sort of moral statement is based on this thing. Another sort of meta-ethical statement is human beings have free will. Okay? It says something about human nature. It's something about what it means to be a human person that stipulates, okay, a particular type of right or wrong that might be proper to the thing. If we determine, for instance, it may be that we can't be responsible for our actions in the same way we might otherwise be. This is worth noting because it seems as though all the time in our life, in our general moral discourse, we demand meta-ethical explanations from people. So a good example of this is a discourse that happens when someone says, for instance, citizens deserve more rights than non-citizens. Okay? You don't just accept that, oh, interesting, that's a cool little factoid to now know. Instead you're like, wait, why? Right? You want to know why we have this sort of differential treatment. Right? You demand an explanation. You say, what is it about citizens that makes them separate? Right? And the person may be able to provide you an explanation, or they may not. But the point is still the same. Your expectation is that they can provide some sort of explanation. That they be able to index to something, right, about the person, or about society, or about governments, that can ground the claim that we should treat these people differently. So the normative ethical claim that citizens are more important to a government than non-citizens is expected to be grounded in something about the citizens or about the government or so on. When we make these sort of statements about everything, right, that's what we're doing. When someone says this person should be punished for their action, and we don't think they should, we say why? Why are they responsible? Or if you say no, you shouldn't punish them, then why are they not responsible for their actions when other people are? We demand this sort of discourse very often, okay? Anytime we do it, what we're doing is we're appealing to meta-ethical principles. In debate, this is a very strategic thing to do. So that's the last thing we're going to cover before we start going into major meta-ethical theories utilized in debate and sort of providing you an outline of what they look like. The reason these are strategic is because what will often happen in debate rounds is you'll have two ships pass in the night. Consequentialism is good because it respects the equality of persons. Okay? Because that way we'll say the larger group, which no matter what the value each human has, be it x, 7x will be larger than 1x. And you'll say that, and then the other person will say, no. Consequentialism is bad because human beings have an inherent dignity, right? They can't be used as a means to an end. And it goes in the other direction. And now we have these two rival claims. The ontology protects dignity, and consequentialism respects equality, and we don't know which one actually matters more, right? Do we care about dignity if people aren't equal, or do we care about equality unless they're dignified? It seems as though neither really matter all that much without the other, right? I can treat my socks differently and use one as a sock puppet and one to put on my foot, because they don't have a dignity. I don't need to treat them equally in the first place, because there's no inherent value to them. And so it's their inherent value that grounds this. But I can also say, if we're not going to treat people equally, then what's the point of saying they have dignity unless that says everyone who has dignity deserves a particular treatment and therefore requires equal treatment? And then the debate just becomes confused, and they're like, well, now I don't know what to do because the round's irresolvable, and then they vote for me because they think I know more about philosophy than you, and then you lose and you're sad. This happens all the time. Because debaters do not understand how to make arguments at a sophisticated level about why the particular things they're appealing to in their moral discourse, and their moral arguments, and their justifications for the value criterion are uniquely important. Okay? And that means you're going to be in trouble. They're also strategic because they allow you to preclude or develop a particular theory of right action, right, that's effective. So anytime you ever heard someone say, for my ethical theory because it's specific to governments, what they're doing is making a meta-ethical claim. A claim about what a government is, ontologically, metaphysically, what it is in reality, right? And saying that that means it can only have certain types of obligations. So any other type of obligation you make on governments is foreign to its nature. It's like going up and saying to a rock, hey, you better hire a great lawyer. Rocks don't hire lawyers. If the rock hired a lawyer, you'd just be confused, right? You know, if a lawyer came up to you, I'm representing this rock. You're like, I don't know what that means, right? Incidentally, this raises interesting questions about the concept of environmental law. Not really, but I was hoping to be a joke people would find funny, but they didn't. Either it's because it's too early or because I'm really not funny. Probably the latter. Oh well, I'll keep trying. It'll be awkward, but we'll all make it, maybe. So, that is why these things are important. Because we're all making these sort of appeals anyway. If you don't understand the sort of appeals we're making, you're going to lose debates people who do. Especially you're going to lose the framework debate, which is the favorite part of the debate, because it's fun. So, meta-ethical claims. What we're going to start with is to familiarize you guys with major trends or major movements within the sort of meta-ethical field, so that you guys will be able to understand the terminology when you research meta-ethical claims yourself, and so you'll be able to understand your opponents when they just sort of spout out words like, before my stand of Constitutivism and practical reason, because the only way to ground what is the nature of human action, which is a precondition to reasoning about the action itself. And you're like, I don't know what that means, because I don't really know what that means. But at least if you know what Constitutivism and practical reason is, you can know why you don't know what it means, namely because it doesn't mean anything. So this will be helpful, hopefully. We're going to start with the concept of moral realism. Okay? Realism is what I might call sort of commonsensical morality. It's what most people think about morality who don't have a philosophical education, right? And unfortunately, I don't think it's what most people who have a philosophical education think anymore about morality, but that's okay. And it's just a sort of belief that, yeah, there are just moral facts out there, right? 2 + 2 = 4, that's true. Likewise, you ought not murder people, that's true. Right? They're both true, and they're both true because it's this metaphysical fact about the universe that says murder is wrong, just as it says 2 + 2 = 5 is wrong. Right? They are just inconsistent. Not like I can look at you and be like, aha! Like, this is where the universe has declared 2 + 2 = 5, or 4, sorry. Right? It's just something natural to the way the universe works in some way. There are these truths out there. There was this guy named Plato who thought that they were grounded in this third realm, this like magical heaven of the forms, where there was like the eternal truth of 2 + 2 = 4, and that like existence is good, and they're like commingled in this weird hierarchy. It's interesting, but unfortunately not many people buy it anymore, or fortunately, depending on your belief on Platonism. But realism has 3 parts. Right? There are 3 assumptions in Platonism, and if you understand the distinctions here, you can understand the development of most metaethical theories. The first component of realism is known as Cognitivism. Sorry, that's the word. Cognitivism. Cognitivism is the statement that moral statements are truth apt. They can be true or false. A lot of the statements we make in everyday life are not truth apt. For instance, if I say go to the store, and you say false, I'll be confused. Because false is not the correct sort of answer to the imperative go to the store. If I give you an order, the order can't be true or false, because it's not the sort of thing that is truth apt in that way. Right? Likewise, if I say, you know, take notes, and you say true, like, I'm not making a statement about, I'm not saying like it is the fact that you will take notes or anything, but it doesn't make sense to say it's truth or false. Now, realism claims that most statements indeed are true or false. They're the sort of things that can be true, and the sort of things that can be false. This allows us to create a distinction between cognitivism and non-cognitivism. Realism is on the side of cognitivism, and non-cognitivism creates its own subset of theories. These are sometimes run in debate. The first one is known as Motiveism. This was a theory first advocated for a guy named David Hume, and then later for a person named A.J. Ayer, and then a guy named Stevenson, whose first name I'm blanking on, and I don't have my notes for some reason. So that's okay, you can just look up Stevenson and Motiveism and you find it. Motiveism says that what I do when I make a moral statement is I express my emotions about it, right? So when I say, you ought not murder, what I'm really saying there is, boo, murder! Murder's sad! No, no murder! Right? I'm expressing the sort of emotional indignity or outrage I get at the concept of murder. And when I say, you should give me a helping hand, I'm like, yeah, help me! Okay? It's expressing emotional content. Now, it wouldn't make any sense to be like, false, boo, murder. Right? You could say, you don't actually dislike murder. Right? You could contest my claim about my emotions. But then what you're saying is, it's false that you do not want me to murder. Or it's false that you feel sad that I murder. But the fact that I feel sad that I murder is different from the moral statement itself. Okay? It's different from the sadness of murder. And the sadness of murder is not something that can be true or false. Only if I am sad about murder or something of that sort. Now, not only do emotions express, not only do moral statements express emotions, right, but moral statements are also ways that we try to coerce or influence others to have the same emotions as us, right? So when I make a moral argument to you, the inherent worth of the human is such that it will always be wrong to kill them no matter the situation. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring your emotions under the same guise as my own. I'm trying to say, look, you should feel this way too, right? And I try to influence you to feel this way. Not because my arguments are true in some abstract sense, they relate to some actual fact about the world. Because the fact they relate to some abstract fact about the world doesn't matter unless you care about it, and caring is an emotion. But instead, it's an attempt to bring about your emotional content to fit under my paradigm, to fit under my set of concerns. So that's Motivism. Any questions about that? Okay. The next move in non-cognitivism is called Prescriptivism. Prescriptivism says that moral statements are prescriptions, they're orders, right? It's like, when I say you ought to go to the store, what I'm really saying is go to the store, okay? And when I say you ought not murder, I'm really saying don't murder. I'm prescribing an action to you. I'm giving you a sort of order, okay? Which then couldn't be true or false. A subset of this is what's called universal prescriptivism. So just like Motivism, murder makes me sad, and you ought not murder is slightly different. In one, I'm simply describing my emotions, the other, I'm trying to get you to believe the same thing. So prescriptivism and universal prescriptivism take a slightly different approach to what a prescription is. So if I say go to the store, what I'm saying there is you should go to the store, something special about you. If I say you ought to go to the store, then what I'm saying is that anyone else in your situation should go to the store as well. I'm saying that this imperative of prescription I give you here and now, I should give universally to anyone who's in like situation to you. That means it doesn't matter who I am, right? If I'm the store clerk, or if I'm the person going to the store, I would still want you to do so. So if I say you ought to jump into that pit of fire, that was really a morbid place for my example to go all of a sudden. I'm not sure why that was, but I'll run with it. You ought to jump into that pit of fire, right? It would raise the question, right? Would I also prescribe that if I were in your position? If I wouldn't, right? Then I would not want everyone in my situation to say the same thing, and so that would be not a moral statement, but a normal prescription. Go jump in, not you ought to go and jump in. So the universal prescriptivist you should know about in debate is a guy named Hayer, H-A-R-B, who uses universal prescriptivism to derive something like what he calls preference satisfaction utilitarianism. If when I'm making a universal statement, what I'm saying is, no matter which situation I was in this circumstance, right, the actor or one of these other people, this is what should happen. What I'm essentially doing is I'm aggregating interests of everyone involved, right, and saying, no matter who's who, which one would I want to happen? It's kind of like Rawls' veil of ignorance sort of idea, but without all the complicated, remove concerns about interest and things like that. So what we just say, if I want to say this is true no matter what the situation is, right, then what would I want that would, best protect me, whichever way the situation should play out. There are other versions of non-cognitivism. As of yet, they've not really been run in debate. Only these two have to any significant extent. Things like Blackburn's quasi-realism is a form of non-cognitivism, but we're not going to get into that, because so far it's not been run in debate. It's complicated, and I've never read about it, so that would make it difficult. Back to realism. Back to the cognitivist side. Once we know moral statements are true or false, The next thing we have to know is which statements are true or false. Okay? Or more importantly, if any statements are true. So, the next part of realism says that some of these moral statements are true. Okay? This is in contrast to a theory known as error theory. An error theory about morality says, yes, moral statements are true or false. They make sense. We know what it means, but they're just always false. Right? There's no actual grounding for why they could ever be true. There's nothing there that actually makes it true that, you ought not murder. And so the statement you ought not murder is false. But so is the statement, it is not true that you ought not murder. Any statement about morality is just a false statement. Oh no, it is not true you ought not murder could be true. But, because that's not a moral statement, that's a statement about the factual fact of a moral statement. But the statement, you ought to murder, is also false. Okay? So that's error theory. Okay, this is advocated for a guy by the name of Mackie, M-A-C-K-I-E, I think, and an old person, Joyce, J-O-Y-C-E. But then Joyce came up with this view called fictionalism, which is, okay, even if error theory is true, right, and no moral statements are actually true, right, we should just, kind of pretend they're true. Because we all use moral discourse, and it's really helpful. And it's not just a sort of pragmatist argument, but we still seem to be doing something when we engage in moral language, so let's just keep doing it, right? Why not? If error theory is true, it can't be that we should not believe in things that are false, because that's a moral statement about what you ought to do. So let's just go with it, right? It could be fun. Right? I don't know, morality's exciting. I seem to be good at talking about it, so if we stop talking about it, that'd be a shame. I wouldn't get hired at debate camps anymore. So, I convince all of you it exists even when it doesn't. Incidentally, it does. Yeah, so keep hiring me. The next branch that the realism tree branches off from is, where are these moral statements located? So the question here is, are these moral statements mind independent? Realism holds that they are mind independent. So this means that if there were no human persons, the moral statements that we make would still be true. So even if no humans existed, it would still be true that if humans existed, they ought not murder. Okay? That is still a fact about the universe. In the same sense that it is a fact about the universe that 2 + 2 = 4, even if no humans are alive to think it. Even if there's no mind to think 2 + 2 = 4, it is still true that 2 stars and 2 stars make 4 stars. Or 2 planets and 2 planets make 4 planets, or whatnot. And likewise, it is still true that atoms have electrons in them. We might not call them atoms or electrons because it's mind calling those things. But it's still be a fact about the universe that it fits together in this particular fashion. We're being quite about it being mind independent. Realism claims that these moral statements are indeed mind independent. So that's realism. This is in contrast to a view which claims that they are mind dependent, unsurprisingly. Now the mind dependent theories are what's known as Constructivism. Okay? These are really, really common in debate. It's the idea that we construct morality for ourselves in some particular fashion. There's something about the way the human mind works where we create morality. So, versions of Constructivism are things like Kantianism, okay? Or certain varieties of Kantianism, according to a guy named Alan Wood. Kant himself was actually not a constructivist, but certainly people like Korsgaard, Engström, Barron, some other people are constructivists. And so they claim that if there were no human minds, right, there would be no rationality. And if there's no rationality, there'd be nothing to ground the sort of moral statements we make. Because we actually, in living our life, in taking action, in valuing things, we make ourselves have value. There's nothing about us, right, that has value in and of itself. It's just in the act of valuing things, we situate ourselves in a moral landscape. We say this is good and this is bad. And by doing so, we appeal to something, and they hope we appeal to something inside ourselves, right? Because we're the things we're trying to justify ourselves to. Not going to go into a lot of detail on how Contractism works, because I already gave a lecture about that, and that would take the next 5 hours. But that's the sort of Kantian version of this. There are other versions of Constructivism that are in debate. One is what's known as Contractarianism. Contractarianism is this idea first advocated for by some people back in Plato's time, right, about how we basically construct morality out of a sort of social agreement, right, in order to be in people's interest. But it has since been advocated for by a guy named Thomas Hobbes, or something. He seemed to be kind of like a weird, realist, constructivist kind of guy, because constructivism as a concept wasn't developed, so he didn't actually know what he was very clearly. I think he's more of a realist, but then people like David Gautier take his ideas and just make him into a full-fledged constructivist. And the idea here is that we would make rules for ourselves as human beings, right? It is our interest to abide by certain rules. Because like when we don't operate by certain rules, which would be really, really unfortunate, right? You know, I would always be worried, you know, Hobbes puts it this way, right? Let's say we have a limited number of resources. We have 976 bananas, okay? So it's a good number of bananas, but the point is it's limited. Now, I don't know how many bananas you want. Let's say I only want 6 bananas, okay? But I don't know how many bananas you want. Maybe you want all the bananas, right? So you're like, this isn't good. Because this person might want all the bananas, so they might want to take them all from me, and they know I won't want to take them. So they might kill me to protect the bananas. And I'm like, this isn't good, because he might want to kill me, I don't know. But now I'm even more worried, I was like, wait, he knows that I don't know how many bananas he wants, or she. And if that's true, right, if she knows that, then she knows that I might want to think that she's going to kill me, so I might want to kill her preemptively. So she knows that I might have reason to preemptively kill her, and so she'll want to preemptively kill me before I can preemptively kill her, because I don't know how many bananas she's going to take from me. Oh, but she's smart. She knows that I know that she might want to preemptively kill me to prevent me from preemptively killing her so that I don't take the bananas that she wants all of, maybe. And so even if she doesn't want all the bananas, she might still want to kill me preemptively. But she knows that I know that now. And so she knows that I'm going to preemptively kill her before she can preemptively kill me. So she's going to preemptively kill me so I can't preemptively kill her before she can preemptively kill me to prevent me from taking the bananas that she wants. Uh-oh. And at this point, we have what's called uncertainty. Right? We're not sure how other people are going to act. Right? We have no way to legislate how they're not going to act. And so any amount of uncertainty makes me realize that they are sort of in control. Because it doesn't matter, right? It could be that this person is super smart and super powerful and super strong, so it would be really hard for me to kill her myself. But I could sneak up on her while she's asleep and kill her, or I could get a group of my friends, probably not debaters, but someone might help me out, right? And eventually we might be able to take her down. And we would have an incentive to do that. So this would seem to be really bad. It would not be in my self-interest to live life this way. So what I do is I try to make the conditions necessary so that we would restrict our actions, because in restricting our actions that would help all of us. And so it would be rational for us to legislate our actions collectively, to make a sort of set of agreements to live our lives by, right, which will limit the sort of actions available to us, improving the state of all of our lives. And so we create a moral system, right? We might create a moral system as a community or culture, a sort of cultural relativism, or we might just make a moral system, like, rationally. This is something that, like, someone like Rawls says, right? What would I agree to, right, if we were in this sort of perfect situation? What sort of agreement would I make, right? And this provides a grounding for morality, which contractarians call metaphysically modest. It doesn't presuppose a whole lot. It doesn't assume there's like these weird moral truths floating in the universe that we somehow apprehend. It just says, look, we're self-interested, we act, we want things, and we're rational, so we can make agreements with one another. We can talk and communicate, and so we want to make particular agreements that would help us all. And so morality is grounded that way. Now, there are other forms of mind-dependent moral truths. To illustrate these, we're going to talk about a little bit what we call Constructivism, or Neo-Aristotelianism, or Functionalism, or any number of other terms that debaters have come up with, or found, people who generally justify this sort of general idea. And these arguments go something like this, okay? The concept of good that we all appeal to is something that is form-dependent, or kind-dependent, or type-dependent, or some other word that's equally arbitrary here, right, that explains the dependency of this sort of good. So, simple example, okay? If I have a toaster, and let's say it's a great toaster. It toasts bread like no other toaster I've ever had. It can toast 12 pieces of bread at once, and it can toast them to whatever degree I want without even putting it in, it just knows. Right, it's a smart toaster. Okay? And it can toast onto the bread the face of Immanuel Kant, right? Every time. Right? It's the world's greatest toaster. Okay? Now, let's say I then go out to my car. And so this is a great toaster because it toasts bread this way. And I go out to my car, I turn it on, boom, it's not working, well this is weird. So I go over to the front, I open up the trunk, I look down, and there are 20 pieces of perfectly toasted toast, okay, with Immanuel Kant's face on them. Like, oh, this is the greatest car ever, it perfectly toasts toast, or perfectly toasts bread, right? No, I wouldn't say that. Because my car is not supposed to be a toaster, right? If all my car does is toast well, it's a horrible car. It doesn't drive me anywhere. I wouldn't want this car, right? Except it's a weird novelty item. But then it's still a bad car, it's just kind of a cool novelty thing, right? And so if all my car does is toast bread, it's a bad car. But we've already established that toasting things is what made my toaster good. So this means what made my toaster good and what makes my car good are different. Another illustration is someone could be a great tennis player, right? This is a good tennis player. But we don't understand that to mean this person is a tennis player and they're good, because they could be a horrible person, right? They could, be mean and cruel and laugh at their opponents every time they lose and belittle their opponents every time they win and things like that, okay? And that'd be really bad. So they'd be a good tennis player but a bad person. What that illustrates is that statements like good cannot be analyzed in the same way other adjectives can. So if I take Hector as a brown mouse, okay, to use a common example in debate, Hector is a brown mouse. I can understand that to mean Hector is a mouse and Hector is brown. But if I say Hector is a large mouse, is that spell mouse or moose? No. Oh, incidentally on moose, side note, but an important one. I think most literature would be radically improved if we replaced all the characters with moose. Okay? So think about it this way, right? It's like Lord of the Rings. And rather than them all being like elves and people, all of them are moose except the hobbits would be deer. Okay? And like Legolas could have a little squirrel and he has like the bow tied between his antlers and the little squirrel pulls it back and shoots. And they could be like a team. It'd be awesome. He had the scene where like, I give you my axe. And they're like, I give you my antlers. I give you my, okay. Or we could do it with Harry Potter, right? And so they're like up in the northern Alaskan woods rather than Hogwarts would be cool. And they'd all fight Lord Voldemort. And they could shoot spells out of their antlers. It'd be great. Okay? But that's a side note. But if someone wants to get on that, more power to you. I'm not a good writer, or I would. So, you can't understand Hector as a large mouse as Hector is a mouse and Hector is large, because a large mouse could still be a very, very small mammal, right? A large mouse would be like this big, but that'd be a tiny elephant. So what it means to be large is kind dependent. In the same way, what it means to be good, this argues, is kind dependent. A good mouse is very different from a good human. Good humans do certain things that good mice don't do. And good mice do certain things that good humans should not do. Okay? And so what that means is when we say good, we're making a statement dependent on one's kind. Now, the reason that I like to argue this is a mind-dependent truth is because what this appeals to is a notion of purpose, right? Or a notion of teleology. Okay? But it seems as though concepts like purpose and teleology are minded property. It's how our mind makes sense of things. Right? So an illustration of this, right, is you can take a tree. Right? Or you can take, here's a potato. Right? Apparently, people tell me if I put a potato in a cardboard box and cut a hole in a part of it, the potato will grow to reach the hole. Right? It's like it's growing to reach the light. Right? It's trying to get to the light. But it's not actually trying to get to the light. To try to do something requires you to be like, light, I want to get there, and then to like think about it and do it. The potato can't think, I think. Right? If so, I have to be like more than a vegetarian. And so, it doesn't actually try to get to the light. It simply executes the coded program in its DNA, right? In a sort of mechanical, efficient causal explanation, right? One thing causes the next in a sort of domino chain, which results in it extending towards the light, but not in any sort of intentional fashion. And so we talk about it as though it's trying to get to the light, because it's much simpler. It's a way to simplify the world, to make sense of the world, right? Because this is how we evolved, right? Our minds would not work if we had to always think about things as they actually happen, because before we knew about cells, it would have made it impossible to understand what's happening inside a potato, right? And it would have been really bad if we couldn't understand how things behave, right? Because then we couldn't like predict the universe or like build tools or do anything like that. And so we think about things through purpose. Our mind uses purpose or teleology as a kind of heuristic tool or simplified system to make sense of the world. Okay? Heuristic means it's like one of those like easy mind tricks to remember something that's hard to remember otherwise, like a mnemonic device is kind of like a type of heuristic. Or it's like a cheap way to do a type of like estimation mathematics that's pretty accurate but not true in a deep sense. Right? So it seems like these sort of purpose claims are often heuristics in that way. And it's a product of the way we think about things. And it's inevitable we think about things this way, but it's a product of the mind. Okay? The other term I used here that you probably want to find is teleological. Teleological means it's a purpose-oriented explanation. So if I say, hey, look at that, right, and point at that clock, there's two explanations you can give. One is teleological. The teleological explanation says, I'm drawing your attention to the clock. I'm trying to get you to look at the clock, right? I need you to pay attention to the clock. The efficient explanation would say, the neurons and synapses in my brain fired in a particular fashion which sent an electron down to my arm and elbow, which resulted in my arm extending in a particular fashion towards that direction, creating the structure known as a pointing right. There's no purpose involved in that explanation, just a series of dominoes, one thing causing the other causing the other. And it seems that both those explanations are true. Right? I was trying to draw your attention, and all those things did happen. Both explanations explain the data, they just explain it on two different levels. In the same way, right, so I did this with Harry Potter at last camp, but then someone yelled at me because I hadn't finished the 7th book, which I was like, that's your fault, right? It's been around for ages, but I'll just use a different example. So why does Romeo kill himself in Romeo and Juliet? Right? Oh, sorry for the spoiler, but who cares about Romeo and Juliet? It's not Harry Potter. So, right, why does Romeo kill himself? Right? Well, one explanation is because Shakespeare made him. And that is a true explanation. Indeed, he killed himself because Shakespeare made it. The other explanation is, oh, he was desperately in love with Juliet and blah, 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 right? And that explanation is also true, right? Both explanations describe what happened. It's described on two different layers, or two different levels, right? One as, why did the book, what caused this to be the manifestation that happened, right? And the other says this is the manifestation that happened. So two, right, we can explain things in our world on different layers. And the teleological, or the Aristotelian naturalist claim that the way we explain these sort of ideas is in this teleological frame. That's the ethical frame of mind, right? As opposed to the physical or scientific frame of mind. So that's, Constructivism, Aristotelian naturalism, those sort of ideas. In a certain way the mind works, and that's what grounds these sort of moral statements. So that's mind-dependent arguments, right? There's a lot of literature here. Oh, one last argument I should talk about. It's useful if you have a written argument of this sort, some sort of constructivist position, Kantianism, Contractism, Aristotelian naturalism, to have arguments about why constructivism is better than other moral theories, right? And in particular, why constructivism is preferable to like realism, right? I think it's just this is a sort of moral truth out there. I think the best argument from this comes from a philosopher, Sharon Street, in an article it's something like A Neo-Darwinian Critique of Realism or some other such boring-sounding title. The argument's pretty interesting, and it goes like this. If you accept the sort of neo-Darwinian picture of the universe, where there's no purpose behind it, right? So we evolve, and we evolve without purpose. There's no God guiding the evolutionary process, okay? Then it would seem really weird to think that we somehow evolve the capacity to apprehend these particular moral truths, right? We evolved a particular sensory array. I can see light within the visible spectrum. I cannot see infrared light, right? It's still that there's infrared light out there, but I've not evolved the capacities to sense it or to identify it, because that did not have the same evolutionary advantage as the visible spectrum did for me. Likewise, I can sense, touching things and hearing things, but I can't sense atomic structures. Right? I have no ability to do that. Right? Now, it seems really odd to think that there would have been any reason for us to evolve this sort of extra sixth faculty that lets us, attach on to some sort of moral truth and know this moral truth. Right? The idea that we'd have this sort of faculty evolve that allows us to zoom and identify, this is the moral truth, would be very counterintuitive. Right? To illustrate this, let's just say the moral realist, right, is right, but the true moral truth out there is always sacrifice yourself for something weaker than you. We would just never evolve a faculty that told us to do that, because anytime we start to get to the point where we begin to sense that truth, we die out. Right? And so there wouldn't be any self-interested reason to have that sort of faculty. So the sort of classic evolutionary picture of human development seems to preclude the idea of any sort of objective moral truth that we can know, and since it would be mind independent. Instead, we seem to have to construct morality for ourselves. Interesting, in Sharon Street also thinks this applies to epistemic truth. The idea we evolved to actually know true things that are actually true is weird. Instead, we evolved to know things that help us, right? But the idea that what helps us and what is true, right, there could be a gap between that. For instance, these two both have the same survival benefit. Tigers are really bad, and I can get away from a tiger by running away. The other one is tigers are really good, and I can get close to the tiger by running away. Both have the same survival benefit, they get me away from the tiger, but one is true and the other false. But if all we did was evolve based on survival benefit, there'd be no reason why our faculties would be truth inclined rather than just survival inclined. And so there's all sorts of interesting implications this has for different philosophical theories. Right? Given that most people in debate rounds just assume a sort of neo-Darwinian godless picture of the universe, it's a very powerful argument to make if you're in one of these particular theories. Okay, cool. So back to mind-independent statements, back to realism. There are different ways that we can ground the claim that there are mind-independent truths, and you should be familiar with them because they're run in debate. Okay, we're doing okay on time. The first one is Intuitionism. Intuitionism is the idea that there are certain things that we just sort of know intuitively, right? In the same way we just sort of know certain basic scientific or mathematical claims. So 2 + 2 = 4 is true. I can't prove it's true, I just sort of know it, and I use it to develop more complex mathematical and scientific and theories of that sort, right? Likewise, basic laws of logic, like the law of non-contradiction, x is not equal not x, or the law of identity, x equals x, right? On something I prove is something I know, and I use that to establish everything else. So the realist claims this is also true for basic moral truths. Murder is wrong is not something I prove, it's something I just know. Right? Or maybe humans have war, it's something I just know. Right? And it provides the grounding and building blocks to develop a sort of moral system. We have our intuitions, and because intuitions lie at the bottom of all reasoning, mathematical reasoning, logical reasoning, scientific reasoning, right? You know, scientists all the time feel like this theory is simpler, or this theory is more elegant, or this theory is more beautiful, right? Because that's just how our minds work, it's how we make sense of the world, right? So if we appeal to these sort of intuitions everywhere else, why not also appeal to them in context of ethics? Right? So the argument goes. Right? So that's Intuitionism. A subset of Intuitionism is a theory known as reflective equilibrium. This is here because, unfortunately, there's more agreement about mathematics than there is about ethics, right? Chances are, like, you guys have never disagreed with someone on a mathematical statement, or if you did, you were able to figure out why you disagreed at some point. Right? You're able to, like, oh, wait, no, one of us was mistaken. But with moral questions, it's often much harder, right? Like, it's hard to actually establish someone actually just, you know, is mistaken, right? Because it doesn't seem like the arguments can always resolve it. So what reflective equilibrium proposes is that we need to kind of fine-tune our intuitions here. And so what we do is we take thought experiments, so examples, right? Can I kill one to save the entire world? Yeah, probably. Can I kill one person who walks into the hospital and harvests his organs to distribute to 2 other people? Probably not. And so we take our intuitions, and we apply different cases, and we try to figure out how our intuitions fit together, okay, to derive the correct moral theory, right? And so we like give cases and take cases and slowly refine our sort of intuitions by evaluating different instances and sort of like this give and take until eventually we reach sort of equilibrium. Like, okay, this seems to best account for our intuitions. So that's that sort of ethical process. It's an interesting one. It's pretty useful if you want to justify something like rule utilitarianism, because rule utilitarianism seems to accord pretty well with our intuitions in a lot of ways, right? You know, we can kill one to save 1,000,000, but not kill one to save 2. Lying is generally bad, but not absolutely bad. You know, things of that sort. Seems to fit with our intuitions pretty effectively. The other theory that seems to fit with our intuitions pretty well is a theory known as double effect. But this is normative ethics, which I'm not getting into right now. If you want to know more, find me during office hours or go to my lecture several days ago, Intermediate Day on util debates. Boy, I went over those. I don't know. This lecture obviously makes sense to go after those, but then I'd have to re-give those. See, it's like a hermeneutic circle all over again, for those of you who went to how to think philosophically. Okay, so that's Intuitionism. Okay, the next form of mind-independent moral truth out there is what's called Naturalism. And now you'd be like, Marshall, we already talked about Naturalism. Aristotle. Okay, fine. So this is a subset of Naturalism, not neo-Aristotelian Naturalism, but other things like Cornell realism or reductive naturalism. These are the things that claim that there is some sort of one-to-one relation, or some sort of relationship between factual statements about the world and moral statements. Like, pleasure is good, okay? It's just a factual statement with pleasure, or the goodness is equivalent to pleasure, right? So, this is just a sort of natural property of pleasure being a good thing, okay? So, this says that there's something in the natural world that actually just is good in some sort of objective sense. And there's different ways to make this sort of system work out. A lot of modern-day naturalists appeal to a principle known as supervenience. And this is the idea that it's a bit complicated idea. I'm going to explain it in a simple and somewhat inaccurate way because it's all you really need to know to post the debate, right? And the way it kind of works is like this, okay? When you take a lot of individual things acting separately and put them together, then they act together and create new properties that exist only as them acting collectively, but they're nevertheless real and significant properties. So take the inflation rate. You could look all over the US, right? Search for it. You'll never find it. Right? I haven't been able to find the inflation rate anywhere. Right? You can't see it, you can't hear it, you can't touch it. But even if you go to the Federal Reserve, who keeps telling us that you can't find it. We don't know where it is. Right? But there's still an inflation rate. It just exists on top of all the individual economic purchases. Right? And so all those individual purchases together create this inflation rate. And this inflation rate actually affects the world. Right? It actually changes the economic purchases we make. And so even though this is something that just exists on top of all the individual economic purchases, it is nevertheless a real and robust thing, which actually exists and affects the way we interact. Another simple example is a traffic pattern. Right? Maybe a traffic jam. Right? The traffic jam just is the collective interaction of all the individual cars on the road. But that traffic jam together will also affect the individual movement of the cars on the road. The traffic pattern supervenes on top of the individual motions of the cars. It has its own properties, collectively, that affect the action of the individual cars that comprise it. Okay? And affect other things. So the traffic pattern is real, even if it just exists on top of the individual things. The same thing is true with this table. Right? This table is real, even if it's just composed of the individual atoms. The table somehow exists on top of the atoms in some way. So the claim is that moral truths exist on top of the interaction of certain physical facts. Right? They come together in various ways, maybe through a social custom, or maybe through the sort of things that things are, combined with the sort of way they're treated, or, you know, we have this kind of complex holism, right? Holism of collective interaction of things, and that together creates these sort of moral truths, okay? This is increasingly popular because physicists and scientists are increasingly realizing that we can't conduct all of science in just like single, that's the word, I don't know why I made it complicated, single experiments, right? That science actually has a sort of holistic aspect to it. We can only understand the individual experiments as part of a holistic theory. We can only understand that theory as part of the sort of individual components. So we can't understand science just, right, and understand like individual scientific truths just through single experiments. And the same thing is here in ethics, right? I can't conduct a single experiment to determine what's right or wrong, but taking scientific data as a whole, I begin to derive the content of right and wrong in a sort of holistic sense. So this is where you often give arguments about like the importance of like community-grounded morality and things of that sort. This is in contrast to just more straight-up productive theories. Things that just say actually like pleasure is good, right? Goodness is equivalent to pleasure. I should briefly talk about a common argument used in debate against naturalism, just because it's super common. I heard it like 3 times at TOC, even when no one was running naturalism. So that was weird. And this is the open question argument. Okay? And the open question argument says that there's 2 different types of questions in the world. Questions which are closed, and which there's not really room to disagreement, but that the answer is contained in the question itself. And questions which are open, which we have to sort of figure out. Right? So a closed question is something like this. Is a bachelor an unmarried man? Right? All we mean by a bachelor is an unmarried man. So the statement, is a bachelor an unmarried man, is a closed question. There's no room to debate it, right? Because the answer is contained inside the question itself. This is in contrast to an open question, right? Which is not true, right? Is it better to be a bachelor? Right? There's nothing about bachelorness that is just intrinsically betterness. It's just something we can question, we can be uncertain about, unlike closed questions. Now the claim is that it always seems like ethical questions are open. So if I say, is goodness good? You'll be like, yes, Marshall. Obviously. But if I say, is pleasure good? You'll be like, interesting. I'm not sure. But if just pleasure means goodness, then the question, is pleasure good, is equivalent to the question, is goodness good? But since one is open and one is closed, they can't be equivalent, and therefore pleasure cannot be equivalent with goodness. This is a little complicated, right? It says that there's something about these statements of fact, that they're different than these statements of value. Because for any statement of fact, it seems always that we can question, is that really a good thing? Is pleasure really good? Well, I'm not sure, right? Now, there are obviously a lot of answers to this argument because it's been popular for a while in philosophy, and philosophers have been like, ah, no, we need to take this down. So a pretty simple one, right? It's times we're uncertain about things, right? Is water H2O, right? It's something we're not sure about until we discover it naturally. Once we know, oh, yes, it is, right? It's equivalent to that, right? Water just is 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen atom in a particular relationship. But we still have to discover that, so it would have been an open question until we made the scientific discovery. Now with naturalism, these moral statements could be equivalent, we just have to make the scientific discovery we haven't made yet to be certain about that. And things like that. The debates go back and forth. There are arguments for and against those sort of solutions, but we don't have time to go into those. Okay, so I think that's everything I wanted to cover within this sort of field of realism, right? That's an introduction to most of the common meta-ethical theories, right? Like a sort of comprehensive theory around debate. But there's lots of other ways people also appeal to meta-ethical principles in debate. And so I want to go through a couple of those types of arguments now. The first thing is ontological questions. Some of you hear, part 1 is the ontology, and then spout off a lot of complicated stuff, right? And then part 2 is the epistemology, and then spout out some stuff. And then part 3 is the meta-ethic. And it's like, now I don't know what's happening, because that should have been the other parts. And like, and part 4 is the ethic. And you're like, oh, and now you don't get to a contention, so I don't know what's happening, right? So ontology is just a complicated word for saying what a thing is, right? What is a human being? What is a government, right? It's a question about what we sort of are as creatures, right? There's different answers to this. Some people think we're sort of fundamentally social creatures. Some think we are fundamentally free creatures. Kant thinks we have 2 parts, a noumenal self, which exists up in like this non-spatial, non-temporal entity, I can't describe it because it's noumenal. It's, like this weird, like misty, it's not misty, you guys get the problem. Anyway, so I wanted to write a pop-up book of the Critique of Pure Reason by Kant, but see, I don't know how I would represent the noumenon popping up because we can't access it in any way. And so it's a problem. If you have solutions, let me know. Oh, also, I want to make a meta-emoticon, which kind of like means meta. So someone like says lol at something, you find it funny they said lol, you could do meta-emoticon lol to be like I'm lolling at your lol. I think it have all sorts of uses. So if anyone wants to get on designing a meta-emoticon, sending it to Google, you should do that too. Anyway, where was I?
Ontological.
Oh, ontology, right. Sorry. So, all that to just say, okay, that we care about what the sort of thing a thing is, right? So a lot of social contract theories are made ontologically, right? This is what a government is, so these are the obligations it has, right? There are also arguments for utilitarianism to work this way. So like Parfit has an argument that human beings are just individual psychological bundles, right? That, what it means to be continuous, so like, a really, really quick example here of these sort of ontological arguments is known as the ship of Theseus, okay? And that goes this way. Let's say I have a big wooden boat, okay? And I'm like, oh no, my wooden boat's on the wrong side of the lake. Oh, not the wrong lake. It's like, okay, I'll take care of it. And I take the wooden boat apart, and then walk over to this lake and put it back together. It seems like it's the same boat, right? It just does. Now, here's the other problem. Let's say I've been on this boat for a long time. I've been sailing. Alright, move one piece of wood and replace it. And then a couple of years later, I move another and replace it. Over the years, I might actually end up replacing all of the pieces of wood, right? But at no individual point was it a new boat, right? Because there's still only like one piece of wood different from what it was before. It doesn't seem its identity is actually at any point changed. But now here's what gets tricky, right? This is what Thomas Hobbes suggested. What if every time I remove that piece of wood, I brought it over to the other lake, and it's slowly been rebuilding the first boat with all the original wood, right? Now, what I have is all of the original boat I've disassembled and built over here, which I said would make it continuous with the first boat. And I just replaced all the wood here, which I said would make it continuous with the first boat. So now I have 2 boats, which were both the first boat. So which one's the boat? I don't know, right? And so it's weird, right? And so Derek Parfit argues the same thing is just true of humans, right? We're not actually like the same person we were in the past. We just have certain degrees of similarity with our past self. All we are is like psychological states of affairs, bundles of psychological data. And if that's all we are, all we care about is maximizing good states of affairs. Because you can't like preserve a state of affairs. If each second a person is going to be different than they were in the past, it doesn't make any sense to like respect that rational nature in and of itself because it has no permanence. Right? It doesn't make sense to bind you to a promise, right? Because it's a different person who made the promise, right? You just have to be similar to them. But in the same way, a twin would not be bound to a promise I made just because they're more similar to me. So my future self is not bound to a promise I made just because they're more similar to me. It doesn't seem I can have an intention, because an intention only happens across time, but my psychological states only exist in individual time segments. Right? And so it seems like only a sort of utilitarian theory could account for this. Right? That'd be an ontological argument for utilitarianism. Another term that's thrown out there that you should be familiar with is something known as epistemology. Okay? Epistemology is the study of how we know things, what knowledge is. Right? How it is that we learn and think about the world and things of that sort. And here people are trying to make arguments like empiricism. Everything we know is learned from empirical facts. Okay? And pleasure and pain are the only empirical facts we know, or some such nonsense as that. Okay? Now, one of the issues here, right, is that most of these epistemological theories have one of two problems. Right? The first problem that's really common in epistemological theories when debate. How am I doing on time? Oh, I'm out. Anyway, they told me I could be like 15 minutes late in the email they sent me because I had to take a poll, which did not take 15 minutes, so basically stole time, but they gave it to me, so it wasn't really stealing, so I can't be okay with it, so we're all good. Right? Yeah. Where was it? Epistemology. Yeah. No, it doesn't. They sent emails saying that was wrong. I know, it is, isn't it? Like an hour and a half of meta-ethics, plus I'd have to give you like a break like 15 minutes ago, because no one can sit through an hour and a half of meta-ethics straight, except Samuel. He's my finger puppet. He's had to do this a lot, so he's used to it by now. Anyway, wait. Epistemology, the study of how we know things. Okay? So one of the really common problems is the same problem that a group of people known as the logical positivists have. Now, I'm not very happy with the logical positivists because they hijacked analytic philosophy for 40 years and got nowhere. These are people who thought that the only meaningful statements are statements that can be verified scientifically. Right? So what it means to be meaningful is to have some sort of scientific aptitude for it. And so for 40 years they refined their theories and worked on them, and everyone was a logical positivist, and they were like, oh, this is awesome. Right? But they ran into a problem. And the problem was this. The statement, only scientific statements are meaningful, was not something we could empirically verify. It was not something the scientific experiment could prove. No one ever devised a scientific experiment that proved only scientific statements were meaningful statements. It was a philosophical statement without any sort of scientific standards, which meant it did not meet its own threshold. Right? It contradicted itself. Because it said the only statements are meaningful are scientific ones, but the statements about meaning are themselves not scientific, and so it was just contradictory. This is a very common problem in debate. People will make arguments for a particular epistemological theory, but then their own theory won't be able to meet the standards they set up. That's a problem. Okay? And it's a very common problem. People often make arguments, for instance, that we only know things based upon a sort of like condition, right? Based on our socioeconomic condition, based on our biological condition, something, right? That fully influences the beliefs that we have, right? But if that's true, that fully influences this, and the belief I have, I don't hold because it's true, I only hold it because of my socioeconomic temporal position. But that wouldn't be a truth-oriented thing, so I don't know reason to trust the belief that everything I hold is caused by this belief, because it's not because it's true that I believe that, but just because of my particular position. If I grew up as a shepherd in Tibet, I probably would not have a materialistic belief about the basis for human epistemology. Right? I just wouldn't believe that. So why should I trust it? Right? Presumably because I buy the arguments, but the only reason I buy the arguments is because of my particular historical place. Right? That doesn't work. So a lot of people, the reason it's so common in debate is people in debate make very radical claims. Right? They make very broad, sweeping claims. But there's a reason a lot of philosophers don't like making broad, sweeping claims, especially in the analytic tradition, because they tend to be inconsistent with themselves. Right? They tend to not meet their own standards. So we all kind of appeal to some sort of common sense. So when you say something other than common sense is the basis for everything, you have difficulty justifying that claim because they justify it via some sort of appeal to common sense. So that's a common issue with epistemological theories run in debate. Some are more sensical, some are less. All they're trying to establish is how we know things, right? How it is that we reason about things, and how it is that we come to conclusions, right? Skepticism is another one, right, that often contradicts itself. It says we can't know anything. But if we can't know anything, we can't know that skepticism is true. We can't know any of the arguments of skepticism, right? This is even true for types of moral skepticism. Like a lot of arguments for moral skepticism will actually undermine epistemic skepticism as well. So it'll be like, there can be no grounding for moral facts, we can always say, why is that, why is that, why is that? I mean, that's just true for epistemic facts too. I can say, why is that true, why is that true, why is that true, why is that true, right? And so it seems to undermine the epistemic faculties too. So if that argument is valid, if it doesn't have a grounding, it's not true, that argument itself can't have an ultimate grounding because it runs into the same regress problem. Why is it true that something doesn't have a grounding? It's not true. What's the reason for that? What's the reason for that? For that? Runs into a problem. Right? And so this is true for a lot of arguments of debate. You want to watch out for it. The last thing I want to do is, so how do you go about debating these things, right? How do you go about arguing for these various theories? Well, there's lots of different ways. And if any of you guys want to, come find me during office hours and we can do a drill where I read a card that says, oh, read a case as a meta-ethical framework. And then I give you a case that's a different meta-ethical framework and you do these sort of layers of comparison. There's all sorts of different layers of comparison you can do. You can say, your meta-ethical theory is better than their meta-ethical theory, for just, standard debating arguments. Then you can say that your ethical theory links into their meta-ethical theory. Okay? And you can say, even if your meta-ethical theory is true, my meta-ethical theory accounts for it in some way. So even if it's true that there are moral facts out there, those moral facts are that we are rational agents, right? And so my constructivist theory still applies. Right? And then you can say, and even if that's not true, your general meta-ethical approach, right, you're a realist, is worse than constructivism for these various arguments. Right? And so the more you know, right, the better you grasp the assumptions implicit in your own ethical arguments, the more arguments you'll have to make against your opponent. If you know that your ethical theory, right, makes a lot of sense if human beings have free will, right, then if your opponent's position does not seem to take a stance on that, right, or seem to be inconsistent with that idea, or if you know your theory is, for instance, consistent with the idea that we are determined, then anytime your opponent sort of presupposes free will, like on the Kantian position, you can just make arguments for determinism and say, my theory is compatible with this, yours isn't, which is the reason for my theory. So this means you have to read things, right? You want to understand the sort of philosophical assumptions that you hold, right? And by understanding these, it'll give you a wide breadth of arguments you can make against almost any framework you pick, because they're going to assume a bunch of things about what humans are, about what governments are, about how we reason, about how we think, about what it means to make moral statements, about what it doesn't mean to make moral statements. And all of these things will be things that you can question, right, and say, your theory assumes X, but X is false. Or your theory will entail Y, and Y is false, right? Or your theory can't account for Z, which my theory can, and so you prefer my theory. And so it's useful to, familiarize yourself. The point of this lecture was to give you guys the terminology necessary so you can delve into this literature yourself, right? And to give you the sort of grounding to understand what sort of overall project is engaged in doing. You can go to lab.